Hello, authors and readers, and welcome to my weekly YouTube video. I'm Miranda Darrow, and this is my weekly video where we're going to talk about a novel deep dive. And I invite a guest to chat with me about a recent novel that demonstrates a specific fiction writing skill or technique. We're going to explore how the author did it with an aim for other authors to see how they can improve their works by reading this novel and studying how they did it. Spoiler alert, all of my novel deep dive videos contain serious spoilers about the books being discussed. So if you have not yet read Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson and want to read it without having it spoiled, pause this video right now, read the book, and then come back. I used to get really annoyed with my book club friends when we had a whole month to read something, but somebody didn't finish and they didn't want us spoiling it. And this was the one and only meeting where we were talking about this book, because that was the point of book club, to discuss the book. So if you really care about spoilers, pause it and come on back. But if you've already read it, or if you don't mind spoilers, which sometimes I don't, let's dive in. By the way, if you have a book club and you'd like to play along, please pick up our book club booster kit, where we have a PDF with the list of questions that my guest and I will tackle, so your group can invite us to your book club. Pause the video at each of the timestamps and you'll get to the new questions, and then you can have your own thoughts, and then bring along two bookish friends who read the book and definitely have feelings about it. So this month's book is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson, and the specific writing craft technique is we're going to talk about is the very voicey first-person narrator, Ernest Cunningham, with a specific focus on his jumping into the future to comment on events that are to come and breaking the fourth wall with a sledgehammer. And my guest today is author Jennifer Colwell, who writes fun rom-coms and contemporary romance novels. I met Jennifer because I edited one of her manuscripts, and it was so funny with great voice, I thought she'd make a great co-host for this book. So welcome, Jennifer. Thanks so much for joining us.
So,
Yes, we're going to dive right in. So, and on your list of questions, this will be number one. The narrator tells us exactly what kind of book this is almost immediately. Ernst openly references classic mystery rules, talks directly to the reader, and even tells us certain deaths are coming. Does this increase the suspense instead of ruining it?
I think it does increase it because, even though like in the very beginning, he lists like specific page numbers where people will be dying. And so as you get closer, I mean, there were even some points where he was like, you may notice that there's a death coming up in like 2 pages, and you're like, oh, I forgot about that, but it is coming. And so you kind of pay a little bit more attention there too. And I thought it was really interesting when I finally got to the acknowledgments that he had an apology for his editor about the page numbers. And
Because I'm
once
sure they kept changing. Yes.
I was like, oh my gosh, that'd be so hard to edit and make sure that you didn't like screw something up somewhere. So I read it first, like in book form, and I noticed that. And then in the audiobook, they mention instead of page numbers, like, in a chapter, blah, 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 or in 5 minutes, you'll hear this. And that would probably be a little bit easier to edit. But yeah, it definitely keeps your attention and you think, okay, I need to pay attention because there's something big coming. So what were your thoughts?
I thought it was a different kind of suspense. So this book, like a lot of them, has a first-person past tense narrator. So we know that this main character, Ernest Cunningham, is going to survive because he's telling us about it after the fact and he's alive. I don't think he's a literal ghostwriter. And he even pokes fun of this fact. So when he's in this back of this truck and he's digging through the coffin and it's sinking into the frozen pond, he points out, oh, we can skip all this tension where I go underwater and I find my way out, because we all know he's going to survive. He's the narrator and he's telling us in past tense. So it's not suspenseful like, is he going to survive? But it's more suspenseful like, is he going to pull this off? Is he going to be able to do this? So it reminded me, some examples of other first-person POV narrators who break the fourth wall include like the classic Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger that has lines like, if you really want to hear about it, and then and for people who've read Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, the main character, Quoth, is telling his story to other people. And so we have this very, and here's what happened, and I'm telling them, and we're sitting at the bar. And it's really funny because that story is supposed to be set within one day that he sits down to tell it, but that audiobook is more than 24 hours. We're like, quoth man, this is not realistic because this story takes more than a day to read. And then another voicey narrator who breaks the fourth wall, but they're an omniscient narrator, they're not the main character, is Lemony Snicket from the series of unfortunate events. He
Oh.
warns the readers about the scary events and he gives us clues and commentary, but Lemony Snicket is not actually a character. He doesn't show up in any of the scenes. The Baudelaire orphans are the main characters. And so there are definitely popular novels that break the fourth wall, but this is not the norm. It says on page 2, when we're still in the prologue, there's only one plot hole and you could drive a truck through. And then
That
he
was one of
says,
my favorite parts.
and then he
Once you
says, I
finally
tend
figure
to
out what they're
spoil
talking
things.
about.
I know. And so I think he's referencing the fact that when he's in the back of this truck, that Michael and Aaron had drove up to the resort on the second morning after Mr. Greenboot's body was discovered. And it contains a coffin, and the coffin has two bodies, and one of them is the dirty cop that their dad had killed, and the second is a child. And we're not sure if it's his brother who disappeared or died, or if it's the kidnapped girl that was ransomed and never recovered. Meanwhile, Ernst is in this back of this truck, and it's parked on a hill. It's overlooking a frozen lake, and he's digging through this coffin and looking at these clues, and then the brakes give way, and the truck rolls down the hill and into the lake, and he needs to swim out to survive. And the explanation later is that his stepfather, Marcello, was the one who had taken off the brake, and that he knew about the bodies, the two bodies in the coffin, and he thought bad guys were going to come after Michael, his brother Michael, and Ernst for knowing about it. So he cut the brakes, or he took off the brakes, hoping that the evidence would sink to the bottom, never to be seen again. But he wasn't counting on Ernst to be in the truck. He wasn't trying to endanger his stepson. But this is a plot hole. Why would Marcello know about these two bodies in the coffin? Why would he know that Michael had known? Why would he suspect that Michael had driven it up with him in this truck on the day after he got out of prison? Hey, let's go grave robbing. It's like, how did he know that he's going to pick this up and bring this coffin with him to a family reunion? There's no basis to know that because he barely gotten there by the time this happened. It was the same day. And he wasn't like, hey, stepdad, come check out what I got in the back of this truck. It's a coffin. So I do think that that's the plot hole, but I wasn't really sure. And then he did that line that said Ernst had spoiled it by being in the truck and seeing the evidence and almost getting killed. But, okay, you spoil a lot of things, but then there's a lot of things that you don't say. What are your thoughts? Are you think that's the plot hole that you could drive a truck through? Or did you think there was a different plot hole you could drive a truck through?
Well, I took that literally, meaning the hole in the ice was the hole that the truck fell into. I didn't see it as a problem with the plot so much, but yes, the truck goes through a hole and it is
Hole
big
in the
enough.
ice.
Yes. So I
And
took
then,
that as a literal pun almost.
but then they said there's only one plot hole. And so it wasn't just a hole, it was a plot hole. And I'm like, is it a plot hole? Why is Marcello cutting the brakes? And I think that is a plot hole because there's somebody else who could have done it who might have wanted to get rid of these people. But that person that we'll talk about later, I don't think that they had that motive yet because they had not yet had the chance to figure out if this family was the people that he was really looking for. Okay. We're going to move on. Question number 2. But that was a fun one. It's just like, hey, let's start off by sending everybody on a wild goose chase looking for a plot hole. Okay, I will. That could be a different one. It could be plot hole chasers. Okay. Next question. Normally, writing advice warns authors not to break immersion, but breaking the fourth wall and then talking directly to readers. And so for any viewers who are not familiar with this is where Deadpool will turn and look at the audience and say something funny and then go back into the scene. And so that's breaking the fourth wall, is when in a book, there, dear readers, I married him. Okay, there we did. We broke the fourth wall. So why does this novel succeed by doing exactly that? And how does directly addressing the audience make the readers feel like co-conspirators instead of observers?
I think that you hit it spot on. When he addresses us as the readers, I mean, I almost feel like a character in the story. Like, I'm with him trying to figure out what's going on. And I think it works really well because of the comedy and the snarkiness in his voice. Because, if it was like a drama, I don't know that you could pull it off as well. But when he's like, yes, there's a storm, because of course there is, you know,
Yes, but it's not one that it completely, oh, maybe. Yes.
yeah. And it's like, you'll notice that there's always like issues with the phone battery or the signal, but don't worry because that's not really coming into play. He can kind of get away with that because it's like he knows the rules and he's telling us what we expect, but we're almost in on the joke and he's not like, actually breaking them.
Yeah, I agree. As a developmental editor, I do say this to clients all the time. If they're newer writers or just starting out, and there's just like one or two times where they break the fourth wall, I say just take them. It is a good rule of thumb to avoid breaking the fourth wall unless it's going to be a key feature to your story. So like Deadpool, known for it. I was looking for like older examples, and like in Macbeth. Macbeth turns to face the audience right after the witches were giving their prophecy, and he says, "Oh, well, if the fates say that I should become king, then who am I to stop the fates or whatever?" But he's not planning murder at that time. So they're giving us his inner thoughts. He's telling the audience directly. And that wasn't comedic because there's very little that's funny about Macbeth. But these do break the spell of fiction. And the spell of fiction is the illusion that the readers are actually in the story experiencing it. So, like, one example of this is on page 30, and he's first introducing Lucy, who is Michael's wife or ex-wife. That was a little hazy. They actually got divorced tonight. So the text reads, "I'll tell you a little bit about Lucy." And then he goes on to tell us about her running her pyramid scheme businesses that lose money, and that his wife, Erin, would go to her parties and buy the cheapest things. But just this act of saying, "I'm going to tell you a little about Lucy," is distancing. It takes the reader out of the story and reminds them that you're being told. And so we didn't really need this because we were going to figure out he was telling us about Lucy when in fact he told us about Lucy. It makes the story feel more like a conversation that you're being told about something that happened rather than living in the book. And so, yes, you could be another character, but you're a side character. You're not the main character. And so I think that's kind of the immersion is when you're. And so another time he breaks immersion, it's just a few pages later on page 34, and he says, "You're a savvy reader, so you've probably already noticed there are a few empty seats at the table." It's like, I could have noticed that, and now you've just pointed it out to me, so I for sure know. And so I really argue that there really is no immersion in this story because it's story time with Uncle Ernie. Instead of experiencing an event alongside or in the shoes of the main character, we're sitting here listening with Ernie telling us the story. So we're not in the scenes, but he's telling us the scenes, and it's engaging. I liked it, but it's a very different experience than especially when people are writing like YA, where it's first person present and you're there, you're in the Hunger Games, you're oh my God, I'm gonna get killed, and but no, here you're not. Uncle Ernie is sitting around after the fact, having some sandwiches or whatever, and telling you about all the crazy stuff that happened at the family reunion up on the mountain. So my recommendation for readers are, if you're gonna break the fourth wall, start with it right away. Do it in chapter 1, and make sure that everybody knows it's a key feature in your book, that it shows up early and often and consistently, just like Stevenson does in Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. Don't introduce it 5, 10, 15 chapters in and then just have them turn and talk. It's just like, what? What? These characters know that we're reading? That's jarring. That takes people out of the story. That looks like it's an accident sometimes. Yeah, make sure that it reads like a feature and not a bug. Okay, next up, Ernst often comments on the storytelling itself. He references mystery structure, reader expectation, genre tropes, narrative construction. How does the novel avoid becoming smug or overly self-aware? And what techniques makes this feel charming rather than gimmicky?
I think a lot of it is the self-depreciation part of it, where again, it's like there's a thunderstorm because of course there is, or you may have noticed that this is happening, but I promise I'm not going to break these rules. And so it's like he tells you, okay, there are these things in place, but it's not because I know so much and you don't. It's like you said, you're a savvy reader. You probably picked up on this. And so again, it's kind of like we're in on the joke, or we know what's going on more than, like you said, it doesn't come across as the smug, like the narrator is better than the reader or something to that effect. And especially I think there's a part where he talks about how like the Watson character is supposed to be like average or maybe slightly below average intelligence, and he's like, oh, maybe I am Watson after all. So
Yeah, because Watson was the main character in the books. So Sherlock Holmes was the featured one, but Watson was the narrator. He was the one who was telling the story. So Sherlock Holmes was the main character. It was about Holmes, but Watson was the one who was like writing it down and narrating it. And then Sherlock did this and that, and I was so amazed. Some readers may think that he's smug or it's gimmicky, but I did love this, especially the meta references to Ernst as an author who's writing a book on writing craft. Okay, so it's just like, oh my God, this is a book about writing a book, in which also a murder mystery is happening. So I liked his section with the rules of writing a mystery and being fair with the audience, and then pointing out when he's following them and adding some more even later on too. I thought it was funny when he did the references to his previous books, including the blurb in the back for the completely fictitious 10 easy steps to write crime like you lived in the 30s, and Golden Age to Golden Page, how to write mysteries that are available for $1.99 online. And I also liked his back and forth comments to his editor, because I'm a freelance editor, and his editor is correcting his use of terminology and whether Officer Crawford could walk gruffly on page 193, and debating whether they can start referring to the woman who was the owner of the inn as Juliet, because it was a mouthful to refer to her as the woman who owns the inn. And later, of course, he knows that her name is Juliet, and that was tedious. And I thought that was funny. And I'm just saying, Innkeeper was right there. It didn't need to be tedious. And so it was right there. And then one of my favorite elements of this part was on page 78. And so he pretty much went into a clue game or movie, if you remember that old movie, where he names all the rooms and he says all the key rooms in this property where things were taking place. And this was in the drawing room, and this was in the whatever. And then he says, any rooms that are proper names that have a capital letter, you should pay attention. Something's happening.
yes.
So that was very much self-referential and meta. And then on page 91, he called out foreshadowing by name. And so that total writing craft and smashing the fourth wall. This is foreshadowing. Let me find it because it was kind of funny. Hold on just a second. Page 91. I've got a flag. I've got a million flags in here. Here it is. When I was feeling, so he's talking about his still wife, but estranged wife, Erin, is hanging out with his brother Michael, and the two of them had gotten chummy while Michael was in prison for the last 3 years. And he says, when I was feeling spiteful, which I try not to be, I wondered if it was because they, Erin and Michael, had something in common that I couldn't match. This is called foreshadowing. And so what they had in common that he couldn't match at that time was that they had both killed someone. So all right, there's some foreshadowing. So I thought that was like, well done. Then all these half chapters, like 14 and a half or 27 and a half, there's no scene at all. He's just talking directly to the readers for the whole thing, telling us getting us up to speed on all the clues and the characters, and grounding us to make sure that we have and I'm just like, oh, well, thank you for those of us who were zoning out during the audiobook. And this is it's like
Quick recap.
like a previously on, but we're still reading it, man. We did not stop.
And I think mentioning the different chapters, there is one in the beginning where it's like my wife, and then the next page is like, I don't want to talk about it, and it just skips over to the next chapter.
I love that.
So yeah.
And then he's like, let's talk about my stepdad instead. Yes.
Yes. And also when you were talking about him being a writer, he mentions how cliche it is. Like, I think it was in a conversation about having the main character be a writer.
Be a writer.
And he's like, well, I don't actually write these books. I write how to write them. And then whoever he's talking to.
Written. It's like,
Yes.
okay.
So you're writing about how to write a book you've never written for people who will never actually write them either. He's like, yes, but it's a living. It's $1.99 on Amazon. So
That's right.
yeah.
No, I thought that was funny too. And then in one of the vignettes, he pointed out that there was a mystery novel that was misshelved, and it was by Mary Westmacott. It was misshelved in the W's, and then Juliet moved it to the C's. And I was like, what is this? So of course I go Google. Westmacott was a pen name that Agatha Christie used. Okay. But then later, when he's giving this list of clues that we should all be keeping track of, he'd said, Mary Westmacott. And I'm like, is somebody using a pen name? What are you doing? And I'm like, this is a red herring. I'm chasing around pen names, but nobody's, well, somebody was using a false name. So maybe that's the clue. But yeah, I was trying to make that connection. Here I am Googling, and usually I recommend authors to avoid putting things in there that people are going to put the book down and Google, and then maybe they won't make it back. Because once somebody goes to the internet, they've got, they could fall into a scroll hole and you may never get them back to your book. But it worked for me because it wasn't the first time I was reading it, and I was trying to track down all those clues because I was really trying to solve it. Oh, and then, okay, I do have a few nits to pick with the depiction of Ernst as an indie author of writing craft books. And I say this as an indie author of writing craft books because I published my six-step revision process book on revising your novel 2 years ago, and I'm working on a few more. But there are some things that he said that are not consistent with a person who is an indie author of books on writing craft. And so first, there's the exchange with his editor about including color photos. So on page 175, which is pretty much the middle of the book where you would sometimes find a bunch of color photos, but usually in a memoir, right before chapter 22, he quotes his editor as saying, a photographic section at the midpoint would require a glossy paper insert, not to mention full color printing, which would need a completely different production process. It's quite costly and not within the budget for this book. And then it goes on. And then, first of all, if you're an indie author, there is no budget. You're funding this yourself. And so you don't have an editor telling you what you can and can't spend money on. You're paying your editor, and you're paying to get the book. There's no budget. What are you talking about? So, and also, if you're indie publishing, you can use a platform like Vellum or Atticus. I use Atticus. And just put the pictures in there. You don't need to put them on glossy. They can be grayscale, and it will cost you more if you want to have the paperback or a hardcover book that's full color, but then you just set the price accordingly. And ebooks don't cost any more to have pictures. They just are, ebooks are just a file. And he says he's ebook only. All right.
Yes.
So yes, I'm like,
there's another
what is
part
your printing cost? There's no printing cost when you're writing ebooks. Yeah. So that
she's
was
like, why don't you just hit them over the head with your hardback? And he's like,
and I'm just like,
I'm digital only.
Ebooks. Yes. So the fact that this editor is just like, oh, and I'm like, no, that's not a conversation that happens. All right. And then the same issue about indie books on page 175. He was thanking his editor for getting the art department to remove the bullet holes from the cover. And I'm like, if you're indie, there's no art department doing your cover for you. You're responsible for your own cover. Nobody's telling you what you pick it. You can hire whomever you want. You can create it on, on Canva if you want. It might look terrible, but and
well,
then
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna just say, to play the devil's advocate.
Do it.
Maybe all his writing craft books have been indie, but maybe this memoir he actually has like an agent or something.
Saying it's a book about writing. It's about writing mysteries. Yes. Okay. And then on the same page, he's asking his editor if they can funnel some of the royalties to Lucy Sanders' estate. If you're an indie author, your editor is not getting your money. It's coming to you. You can do whatever you want with it. Okay. All right. And then there's references to his ebook on writing spy novels. But then when he lists his books, he doesn't say it. And I'm like, come on, I wanted the fun title for the spy novel book. I know it was a missed opportunity. All right. Okay. So that's my so maybe you're right. Maybe he had self-published books on writing craft, but he published this one as a memoir, maybe in his fictional universe, because this book itself is a novel because it's fiction, because the author is not actually Ernst, it's Benjamin Stevenson. And so but that's all kind of fun too. He writes writing craft books, but this is a memoir, but then this is actually a novel. And so if you've read the second one, Everyone on This Train is a Suspect, it's a bunch of mystery writers on a train. And then the murders start. And so he's invited along kind of tangentially because is his book really a mystery? It's a true crime. It's not really writing craft. Let's tackle the next question. Ernst navigates with hindsight. How does retrospective narration and past tense allow Stevenson to manipulate tension differently than a more immediate POV style would? What advantages does hindsight narration create for foreshadowing, irony, humor, or emotional framing?
I think that there are a lot of twists available because of the different context. It's like he promises that he's not going to lie to us, and he doesn't. But there are certain things that, when you read them or you listen to them at one point, you think one thing. And then as the novel goes farther, you realize, well, he was telling the truth, but it's different than I pictured. Like one of the big things that, as an example of that, was when he's like, I was sitting next to my brother when he died.
Yes.
And, you would think, okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. But then you're like, oh my gosh, that's different now. So,
yes. And so we're spoiling this. And so the story had been after their father had died, their mom was stressed out and being like threatened by some bad dudes that the dad had been associated with, where they wanted something that he had, some pictures or something. And she's all stressed out. She's going to her job. She parks her car and she leaves her young children in her car and she goes to work and she stays there. And the boys are baking in the car in the hot sun all day, and she's ignoring all these phone calls from the school saying, hey, the boys never made it. Where are your kids? And then, Ernst gets rescued and was having, heat, not heat stroke, but problems and stuff.
yeah.
And then he says he sat next to his brother as he died. And so we were all thinking that Jeremy, the youngest one, died right there in the car. But instead, Jeremy had gone missing. And we're just like, okay, that was some intentionally tricky placement there. Mr. Guy who says, my name is Ernst and I am Ernest and I always tell the truth. It's like truthish. Oh, what else did you have to say?
No, that's good. Truthish, that's a good word.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that the feature of having the main character who's talking about writing in this book, and that it triples the narrative trickery by having them use this later in timeline perspective for writing the book to give us what I like to call future voice. So future voice is where you're reading a chapter and then you get to something it's like, what I didn't know then, but later realized was, and it's just like that too breaks the fourth wall and takes people out of it. And I usually flag this and I warn my author clients that this breaks the spell of fiction and it takes readers out of the scene by reminding them that they're reading rather than just experiencing the book, and the sense of immediacy. And it does impact the pacing and tension because boom, you're like, oh, I'm reading this. So I made a previous novel deep dive like a month ago, and it was about The Overnight Guest by Heather Goodenkoff. And readers know from the blurb for this book that there's a family annihilation and a teenage daughter survives. So we're in the scene that's leading up to the night of the shooting at the family's farmhouse. And she's hanging out, the girl who survives is hanging out with her best friend who was there for a sleepover. And then they drop into future voice POV that said, if Josie had known then what was to come, she would have hugged her mother and told her father that she loved him. And I felt this was so unnecessary because it took this tension out of the whole next scene. Because the next scene was she and her friend are out in the yard when the shooting starts, and they run into the cornfield, and she loses her friend's hand and she gets shot in the arm. And then the next morning she goes back to the farmhouse, and then she finds one parent, and then she finds the next parent. We didn't need the feature voice telling us that, because then all that tension was gone if we already know that it was the last time. Anyway, it would have been more suspenseful if we hadn't had that visit from the future. This story has a different voice too than The Overnight Guests and other thrillers and suspense, where scene immersion is pretty important key to keeping readers hooked. Here, it's less of a thrill ride and more of a shell game. Right? So if you're at the carnival, this isn't the wacky ride. This is the, ooh, where's the ball? Which shell is it under? And who killed Mr. Green Boots? And do we really care? Because we're much more interested in the mystery of who did all these people in this family kill, right? Okay. All right. So, Jennifer, your book club likes to have themed foods for their events. So
Yes.
we're going to take a little break from talking about narrative structure, and let's talk about menu recommendations for this book. I'll go first because this was your question.
Okay.
It's a fun idea. I've heard of book clubs doing this before. It's been a couple of years since I've gone to an in-person book club, but my immediate thought was absolutely morbid. And I think we need smoked salmon and smoked pork, and because all these victims of the black tongue were smoked. What were you going to serve at book club when you read this?
Yes. I really like the smoke thing. You could always go with barbecue if
Yes.
you needed to. Obviously it happens in Australia. So if you happen to have like an Outback Steakhouse, or, we
Have a
used to
blooming
have
onion. Yes.
exactly a blooming onion. That would be great. But also it's in the, so I guess I never realized that Australia has like snow and ski resorts, because I always thought it was like hot
Mountains, I
and
guess they're up high.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
No,
mean, I
that's
guess,
not what I'm picturing. I'm picturing the Outback and hot.
yeah. You could maybe have it in the winter time and like get like hot chocolate or something. I don't know. Something
They're
involving,
summertime though, right?
yeah.
Because for them
Oh,
it's summer.
oh, that's right. Yes.
Because I did read one that was a murder mystery in Australia that was set at Christmas, and it was so hot. And I'm like, this is so weird, people. And so they were all going surfing. I'm like, what? Okay, of course you are.
Yes.
So,
And then
no,
he
that's
also
fun.
mentions, yeah, there are 3 specific breakfasts in his life that have been monumentous. And so you could always like go for breakfast foods too.
Yeah, because one
So,
of them was when he finally got the letter from the fertility clinic, right?
yes, that was the breakfast about sperm. That was
Yes.
another where he just laid it out there and you're like, okay, I'm not sure where this is going, but okay.
Yes. His wife had been hiding the mail from him because she didn't want to get pregnant, and she kind of let him think it was his fault, and she kept hiding the results of the fertility clinic that were like, "Oh no, you don't have a problem, but your wife's on the pill. Have you noticed that your wife is taking the pill? Maybe that's why you're not getting pregnant." So, I don't know what food you're going to have with that.
It's true.
Maybe mojitos. Why not? Okay. Goes
There
good
you
with
go. Thank you
anything.
for humoring me there.
All right, back to the craft topics. Ernst, our main character, is both highly honest, but also unreliable. He frequently tells readers he won't lie, but he withholds information strategically. How does Stevenson create a narrator that readers trust emotionally, even if they can't trust him factually?
Well, again, it goes back to, some of the things that we already talked about. Like I was sitting next to my brother when he died, and that is a true statement. It just didn't mean what I thought it meant when I read it the first time. And let's see, I think there's another one where he's talking about Juliet, the inn owner. And he's like, yeah, we won't lock lips until this page. And by the way, I'm naked. And so, again, you get a certain picture in your mind of what's going to happen. But really, she's
He was
giving
doing
him,
CPR on him
yes,
after he drowned, and they didn't want him to get hypothermia, so they took his wet clothes off him. Sexy, sexy times with the innkeeper. Yes.
Oh, but then he specifically says it is not one of those type of books. So you should not expect,
That's
any
right.
hanky panky going on.
No. Yeah, I like Ern. He's very charming, but I don't trust him. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. And I might be a more skeptical reader by nature or person by nature. That's definitely been reinforced by my day job because when I went to law school and learned about how unreliable eyewitnesses were, and multiple eyewitnesses give conflicting accounts, and they're both like totally convinced that they're right, and how people are limited by their biases and their worldview. I don't really believe anyone. I believe that you believe that. But but for me, it starts with the prologue. Before we even get to chapter one, Ernst tells us that everyone in his family has killed someone, including him. And then, but he doesn't tell us who he killed or when or why or how. And so to quote the main character, have I killed someone? Yes. Who was it? Let's get started. Okay. So he just duck, dodge, dive, dip, dodge. And so and then he goes on chapter after chapter without telling us about who he killed and dangling that unanswered question for pages. And he tells us a long story. Then he starts in on a long story of a night 3 years ago when his brother Michael shows up with some dude that he'd run over while he was drinking. But Michael didn't actually kill him because, he'd already been shot. So it wasn't me. And you can see that he was shot. But then this guy is still alive. And then Michael finishes him off.
Yes, and he
And so,
says that you'll notice in so many pages there's going to be a death. And so
yes.
you see it coming.
And then Ernst turns Michael into the cops. But Michael only gets 3 years in jail because they hired a really good lawyer and somebody else did shoot this guy. And Michael didn't have a gun. And so they say that, and then everybody in Ernie's family really hates him for going for the cops and turning his back on family. And then we're totally immersed in this family reunion at the ski lodge. And by the way, Michael's getting out of prison right now. And we never get back to who Ernie had killed. Nope, we're just no hints. We're just going to pretend like we didn't even say that. And then later, something happens, and Ernie is with someone when they die, and there's a wink and there's a nudge, nudge, and then you know that somebody died there because that's the page number, but he glosses over it. And you need to remember this admission and the statement, "I was next to my brother when he died," and then you're like, died or was killed when he was sitting next to Jeremy after the fire at the lodge at the very end. So yeah, otherwise you could slip right by that and be like, oh, I thought he died in the fire. Did he though? Did he? Just like the guy that Michael had run over, also, passed away while he was gently in somebody's arms or hands around his throat. It's kind of like a hug. And so, and then we get another question. Um, Later down, we're going to talk about who each member of the family had killed. And so we'll break that down more later. But I don't think that our narrator is reliable. None of these characters are horrible. They're not like the main characters in Gone Girl, where they're just like the worst of society, and the only good news is that they're together and not in the dating pool, but the bad news is their parents. And so no, I don't think Ernst is a horrible person, but he has a, let's say, tenuous grasp on the truth and candor. So there we have it.
I do think that was very full circle to end how it did in the snow versus the white spider webs with, very similar circumstances. So
Yes, this is what our family does. Yes. So all right. Next question. This novel has an incredibly distinctive voice. What specific choices make Ernst's narration feel unmistakably him? What can authors learn about creating narrators who feel like real people instead of interchangeable POV containers or storytelling units? And would the fourth wall breaking style work as well without that comedic voice?
again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but he definitely has a very snarky type, almost like bitterly sarcastic, but with enough comedy that, it comes off as he's kind of like making a joke of himself sometimes. And he's very self, I mean, he's aware that, like, especially when he's talking like his brother and his former wife or however that relationship is, he's like, okay, yeah, it did bother me. And so I think yeah, it definitely helps to have the comedy when you're breaking the fourth wall, just because then it feels like you're in on the joke and you can kind of um it's like you said, the wink wink nudge nudge, all that. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure. What are
absolutely.
your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that the main character was relatable, but not because we have really anything in common. I'm not from a family of murderers, or people who even accidentally kill people, but he got me on his side early on. In chapter one, when he was talking about 3 years ago when his brother called him up late at night, and this was unexpected. Here's the paragraph. It says, "I'm not normally a night owl, but Michael had called me a half an hour before. It was one of those phone calls that as you literally read the time, it's not to tell you that you just won the lottery. I have a few friends who occasionally call me from their Uber home with a roaring tale of a good night, and Michael's not one of them." And then he says, "That's a lie. Actually, I wouldn't be friends with people who call after midnight." And I'm like, yes, yes, right there. I can picture myself co-hosting a party with Ernst Cunningham and hanging up that banner in the kitchen that says, "Please leave by 9." I don't know if you've seen that, but I'm just like, get out. I don't want you here late. I don't want to be dealing with that. And then another example of his sense of humor is pointing out the humor of how funny it would be to add a single piece of punctuation to a road sign on his way on the drive to the resort. So if they would have added a comma to make the sign read Ski Mountain Lodge, comma, retreat, then that would have had a whole different meaning. But it's also foreshadowing because you should run. There's deaths coming here. And then he says his wife Erin would have found it funny, so she laughed in his head and he took credit for it. And so I thought that's cute. It's like, yep, but then she's not there. And so then he took this funny moment and he drew us in with his humanity and wanting to know why Erin is not in the car with him. And then what else does Stevenson do with this voice? I think some of it, crikey, it's the Australian charm. And I listened to the audiobook the first time I read this, and it probably helped me to want to hang out with Ernie because the narrator is charming and it's so tongue in cheek with all the asides and hey, we're all in this together. And they didn't take this investigation too seriously, even when people in his family were dying. Sure, they don't care about Mr. Green Boots. They don't even know who he is, but they seem like fun and you want to stick around despite all the horrible things that are happening. It's personality, despite not really being able to trust everything he's saying, because if he was really that forthcoming, he would have told us who he had killed when he first mentioned that he had killed somebody. Because, really, really forthright people don't just say that and then leave it dangling and never come back. Okay. I recently worked with an author on their manuscript, and the author is also Australian. And she was dabbling in breaking the fourth wall, but not right away, and just kind of scattering in a few places. And I said, if you're going to do it, you need to do it early and often and consistently. And then I recommended that she read this one, but also Kate Emery. And so there's two different titles for this one, but the title that I read in the United States was The Dysfunctional Family's Guide to Murder. But I see that there's other versions on Amazon by Kate Emery, the same book called My Family and Other Suspects. So depending on where you live, that one was as a murder mystery. It's YA. So my author is writing YA murder mystery, and she's trying to solve her granny's murder, but it's not in a school setting like a lot of the YA ones. And it's her family's taking an extended holiday, and Ruth, the main character, is constantly talking to the readers, and it's very charming. And I'm just like, if you're gonna do it, study some of the books. That's why I do the novel deep dives. It's like, hey, see how people are doing it and just see how often it's in every chapter, man, because it's a feature. It's not a slip that made it through editing. I'm
So go
trying.
big or go home.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm trying to think of examples of recently published novels, anything that's more recent than like Shakespeare, who did a lot of asides, where they're not funny, and they're not using a comedic voice. And I can't think of any. So, Jennifer, do you have any viewers? Do you have any? Drop your comments, send me an email, let me know, because I think this is kind of the Deadpool effect that audiences now are expecting that if a character in a book or in a movie is going to break the fourth wall, that they're going to be pretty funny about it. Otherwise, people are going to be like, why don't you just get back in your scene, you know? So,
I think my biggest takeaway from your answer there was that you don't mind being friends with a killer as long as they'll go home by 9 p.m.
that's right. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, you can hang out here. We'll throw some shrimp on the Barbie. So
There's another food theme right there.
there we go. And that'll be a murder mystery because I'm allergic to shrimp.
Oh no!
No, yes, I've just invited a killer to my house. All right, okay.
Could go wrong, right?
What could possibly happen? All right, okay. This book contains a lot of backstory, family history, layered interpersonal drama, but it doesn't really feel like an info dump. How does this voice transform exposition into entertainment? So have you go first, and then I'll talk, and then we'll go one by one through these characters and who they killed.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah, you're totally right. There's a lot of backstory, and you don't have the, okay, here is exactly what happened. Because like you said, you're mentioning at the very beginning, hey, everyone in my family's killed somebody, but then it kind of goes from, okay, here's what's going in real time, and now we need to have a flashback so you kind of understand the context, and then, oh, and then this thing happened, but here's the another flashback. Like, you don't even figure out exactly how his dad died until like about a third of the way through the book or something like that. So he does
They
a really
kind of
good
hinted that
job.
his dad was a cop.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
the police officers are going to show up and their hats are going to be off and all these things. And you're just
Mhm.
like, oh, he was a service officer. No, he killed a cop. And so he
Yes.
was a crook. Oh, no.
So he did a very good job of just like leaving breadcrumbs, just telling you what you needed to know when you needed to know it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the big emphasis on backstory is really embedded in the title and the premise, that the real mystery is not who killed Mr. Green Boots, but who did everybody in his family kill? That's so unique. So there's this murder at the ski lodge and they're trying to solve it, but really I think that's small potatoes compared to figuring out who each member in his family had killed and how or why. And so most, but not all of these had happened in the past. So let's go through them. So Ernst's dad, who did Ernst's dad kill?
All right. So Ernest's dad killed the cop at the gas station.
Yep. And so Ernst was pretty young, like 6'7", something like that. 6'7". Okay.
I can't believe you did that. Yes. I've got kids, so I
I've
totally
got
get
kids too. Yes.
it.
So and my kids hate that. And I do that just to torment them. So yeah. And so he was robbing this place and two cops showed up and he shot one and the other one shot him.
Yes, and
Yep.
so they set it up like he was basically robbing the gas station, but then later on you find out that maybe those were the crooked cops, and his dad was actually trying to, kind of figure out how to get the dirt on them, and so he was a bad guy trying to be a good guy, and that's what got
That's
him
right.
killed.
And that's
Yeah.
that's what did him in. If he would
Yeah.
have just stayed bad, he would have been fine.
Hmm.
And that's his mom's attitude too. All
Yeah.
right, next up, Ernst's older brother Michael. So I'll take this one. He
Okay.
killed the second dirty cop while trying to get information about the kidnapped girl from them. So this is the guy that he hit with his car and smothered then when he wasn't quite dead. And this just reminded me of this true crime series on Netflix called Should I Marry a Murderer? And so I don't know if you saw this one, but it was about a woman who was a doctor in like Scotland or England, somewhere like that. And she meets this guy at a dating app, and he's very charming, and he works on a farm, and he's got this great Scottish accent, and she's all gaga for him. And then he admits, oh, there's this guy who went missing while doing a cross Scotland bike ride for charity. Yeah, I ran him over with my car while I was drunk one night. And then, we were going to just toss him in the back of our truck and bury him on the farm. But then when we got there, he was alive. And so we had to kill him first. And then we buried him. And I was like,
Sounds exactly like this story.
it is. And I'm just like, what's happening? Because this was true crime. And I'm just like, All right. So Michael is these idiots from this show that this lady's like, should I marry him? Should I date him? Or should I turn him in? I'm like, I don't know. Did I miss anything? Did his brother kill anybody else? Who shot that guy?
I think what happened was the guy had brought the gun and somehow it misfired and he shot himself somehow.
Okay. All right.
It was a little fuzzy.
Yeah, because he was like, I didn't shoot him. And I'm like, okay, I believe you. But then you ran him over and then you
Yeah.
threw him in your car and then you smothered him. And
So, yeah.
then, yeah, and then your brother turned you in because he was not all about that. All right. Next one up. You can take this one first. The stepsister, Sophia.
Okay. So Sophia was the surgeon
Yes.
and she was like under investigation or in the process of being disbarred or something because a patient had died while she was operating on them.
Yep.
And she compared it to the movie with like I think it was Denzel Washington where the pilot was drunk but he like saved everybody because he landed the plane in a way that only he could, like I don't know if it was upside down or what. And so she was like hiding this secret like drug problem,
Yes.
but she said if I had it to redo again I wouldn't have changed anything. I am totally confident in what I did. It just did not end well. So,
Yes. Yeah, and that was interesting because the reason she was under investigation is somebody had seen her hours before at a dinner where she had a glass of wine. And so then they were investigating whether she was operating while impaired. But really, the glass of wine was small potatoes because she is an oxy addict and she's she's addicted to opioids. And she's trying to detox while she's up here at this mountain resort. And so the aunt Catherine, I'm like, where's my post-it note? Aunt Catherine had swiped her pills and was holding them hostage. And then after our main character Ernst had smashed his hand, she was doling them out. And Sophia didn't grab that and just say, "Those are mine," and run off. But yeah, no, she killed somebody in the course of her job, which may or may not have been medical malpractice, and the jury is still out on that one. And she needed $50,000 for rehab. What did she need $50,000 for?
can't remember what she needed the 50,000 for.
All right. Okay. And this one, I couldn't tell if Sophia's dad, Marcello, was married to Ernst's mom. So Ernst's mom is Audrey. We'll get to her later because she's complicated. But after after Michael had killed this guy, they'd hired Marcello, this lawyer, to defend him, and then he got together with the mom, and so he became the stepdad. And so Sophia
See,
is his daughter. Yes? No?
yes, I think the stepfather actually defended the dad
Is there
before
anything to defend? He was dead.
yeah, but somehow he was friends with him and he
Yeah.
married his client's widow. I remember that.
Okay.
And then later on he defended Michael.
Okay. But do you think they were married before Michael did that 3 years ago? Because I was
Yes.
just like, because they seemed really close with Sophia for people who'd only known each other for 3 years or less.
Yes, I think they got married shortly after the dad died.
Okay, that could be. That could be. And then Marcello defended Michael because he was already his stepdad at that point.
Yes.
Who did Marcello kill?
Okay, so on this one, I think technically he killed Ernest because he cut the brakes and Ernest
Okay.
fell in the lake and
he lost consciousness and they had to do CPR.
yeah,
Which
I
was
think he was
lips were touching lips while I was naked.
yes, exactly. So he survived, but I think technically he might
He
have
was
been dead.
flatlined. Okay.
Yes.
All
So I
right.
think that's the way he got the stepfather involved.
Okay. All right. And then we have Ernst's wife, Erin, who's now estranged, and she shows up there with his brother, Michael, which is who's trading up with brothers? Yuck. No, there's a larger dating pool in the world, Erin. But we find out that she too she and Michael had something in common, and that they were both responsible for someone's death because her mom had died during childbirth with her. So she was an infant murderer. Oh no. And so, but she felt guilt about that. And so,
And I think her dad was really abusive because of that too.
yeah, you killed your mom. Like,
Mhm.
I didn't ask to be born, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe better medical care could have prevented this. Just a thought. Okay, so that's Aaron. You've got Aunt Catherine. Who did Aunt Catherine kill?
So Aunt Catherine was like the younger sister who used to be like, kind of the cool young aunt. And then she, I guess, drank a lot. And there was something about a bus stop. So I'm thinking she like hit somebody with her car while she was drunk.
She did, but I think that the person that she killed was her best friend who was in the passenger seat.
Oh, okay.
And that she had a messed up leg. Catherine had a messed up leg as a result, but she refused to take painkillers, opioids, because she knew how addictive they were. And after this accident, she became a teetotaler, and that's why when Catherine started doling out the opioids to Ernst, I'm just like, she wouldn't have these. These aren't hers. What's going on? And I
Yes.
thought somebody was going to get dosed with fentanyl later because I'm like, hey, people who are really avoiding any addictive drugs don't walk around with a bunch of opioids. All right. I don't think that Catherine's husband Andy killed anybody.
I don't think so. He had that fireplace poker and he was like whacking the
Jeremy.
Jeremy with it. But I
But
don't
he
think
didn't kill Jeremy.
no, I don't
No.
believe so.
All right. And so we're going to excuse Andy because he is a Cunningham in-law only. He's not a Cunningham in name or by blood. So if you need a chaperone, call Andy, who's apparently really dull and boring, but he would probably also abide by the get out by nine rule. Because
Probably, yes.
all right, now let's tackle Audrey, Ernst's mom. Who did she kill?
This one I was having trouble with because originally he made it sound like she killed Jeremy because
The
he
youngest
was
son.
the youngest son. He was locked in the car, and Ernest was next to him when he died. And so it seems like, that's what happened because it tells the story about the bank robbery and how she got fed up and she stole the bank robber's gun and like shot him. And you think, oh, well, that's who she killed. But it was loaded with like a beanbag pellet or something. And so she broke some of his ribs, but she didn't kill the bank robber. And it turns out she didn't actually kill the son either, because
No.
instead of dying of heat exhaustion or heat stroke or whatever, he was kidnapped. And so this is the part that I'm fuzzy on. Did she actually kill somebody?
I don't think that she did. And so I think that he's justifying this title and this statement because at the time he started writing the book, he had thought that Jeremy was dead. Because remember, they had the funeral for Jeremy 7 years after they were locked in the car. And so somebody who's missing for 7 years, that's how long it takes to get them declared legally dead. So then they had a funeral. So then he was dead. And he was dead because he'd been kidnapped by these horrible people, and it was his mother's fault. It was his mother's fault for leaving them in the car where they could get snatched. It was the mother's fault for not giving them whatever files or whatever the dad had. But everybody in the family was blaming her for that, even though I don't think she did. But it's also a little bit of fudgery because Ernst himself had not killed anybody until after they knew that Jeremy was alive, because the person that Ernst killed was Jeremy. So
Spoiler alert.
I know, spoiler alert for all of these. But yeah, and so yeah, so I don't think that Audrey actually killed anybody. So, question on this. And so, if anybody who's watching this has a different interpretation and thinks that she actually killed some different bank robber and we just missed it or something, that's possible. Let us know. Um, yeah. And so then let's talk about Jeremy for a minute. So Jeremy is the younger brother. He's also he was raised by a foster family that they took him in and he didn't even know he was adopted. And so he didn't realize that Mark and Janine Williams were not his real parents. And so they were two of the people that he killed when he found out that they had lied to him and raised him very nicely. That was so terrible.
Yeah, I was a little like thrown off by that. It was like, wow. I mean, I can understand like being upset you didn't know you were adopted, but I mean, they didn't really deserve to die by torture.
Right. And he was 7 when he went to live with them. Right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know, because he was younger than Ernest.
He was younger, but they
Oh,
said that
but
he'd been
yeah.
like lost for 2 years and he was out
Okay,
roaming the
yeah.
street. And then he got scooped up by social services. I'm like, don't you remember going there? You're 7. You're like, what, a second grader? Don't you remember anything? Maybe not. Maybe it was traumatic. And so Jeremy is the all-star member of the family because he killed off his adoptive parents, the Williamses. He killed off the cop who had been their dad's handler, but he didn't kill her right away. He caused enough lung damage that she ended up at Sophia's emergency room where she had tried to save her, but she died later because breathing in these ashes coats the lungs and you suffocate later, and it was horrible. So that's number 3. And then he shows up. He's impersonating Officer, what's the name?
It was Darius
Crawford. That's it.
Crawford, yes. And wasn't that an anagram
It
too?
is an anagram. Yes. I can't remember what it's an anagram for, but I know it was. And so he killed off the real cop, the real sheriff, and took his jacket and then was impersonating a police officer who was investigating the death of the guy that he killed. Okay. And so Mr. Green Boots was actually the real police officer there. So that's 2 cops, the one who had been the handler, the dad who had botched the information and kept him involved and got him killed, and then killed off this cop so that he could get close to this family. And he was interested in getting close to this family because they realized that they were his biological family, and he was hoping that they were all a bunch of sociopaths like him because he found out that they kill all kinds of people. Everybody in this family has killed somebody. And he's like, this is my people. I have found them. They're going to embrace me with open arms. And they're going to see like, yes, you've done extra work. That's awesome. You're the best one yet. But they don't embrace him. And so then he kills Michael. And then he finds out Lucy knows that he's not the cop because Lucy finally sees him, and the real cop had pulled her over for speeding on the way there. And so she knows that Green Boots was the cop and that Crawford was acting, he should have known that, right? I mean, so Lucy either gets pushed or jumps to her death off the top of the chalet.
Yes, if we go back to, who everybody killed, he did mention that Lucy like jumped off is what they
Lucy
find out
herself.
later.
Yes.
Yes, she killed herself. And there's a little bit of foreshadowing. I caught it the second time around because she's like, oh, can you imagine that way to go? I'd rather. And I think she did have the option, like the cop or Darius or whoever had her up on the roof, Jeremy. And it was like, well, I'll either like do this black tongue thing to you too. And she's like, no, I'll just jump and make it easier on everybody.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he would have preferred his like, ancient torture method. And she was like, that sounds pretty miserable. This is faster. Toodles. Yep. And so she killed somebody by killing herself because she was the only person who could connect Jeremy to the murder of Green Boots. And so she had to go. And then Jeremy tried to kill the whole rest of the family by lighting the place on fire, but actually kind of burned up himself, but not to death, because then that brings us to Ernst.
Yes.
And so how do we know that Ernst killed his brother Jeremy?
Because he was sitting next to him when he died.
That's
in
right.
The white snow, just like Michael with all the spider webs.
And everyone in my family has killed someone. And he says, have I killed someone? Yes, I have. It's Jeremy. So there you have it. Did we miss any family deaths? I don't think so, but anybody who wants to let us know, yeah, let's just keep the death roll going here. All right. Next question. This is a mystery novel where the narrative voice becomes a part of the entertainment. How does that change the pacing expectations compared to more plot-driven thrillers? And what risks do the authors take when voice becomes the primary engine?
Well, it's like you said, he risks taking us out of the story because you're moving along and then there's like this aside or this flashback or I don't want to talk about it or something that you feel like googling or something like that, but he is entertaining enough to like keep us like following along, I feel.
Yep, I agree. I think this story is 100% voice-driven fiction. It's definitely not a high-stakes murder mystery because nobody really cares about Mr. Greenboats or who he was or why he killed them. The initial murder to investigate is just something to do while we're waiting for Michael to show up and to see if the whole family is going to explode when Michael faces his brother who had turned him into the cops 3 years early. So we're all waiting for that, and whether he's going to demand back this 270,000, whether he forgives Michael, whether their mom Audrey will speak to Ernst again, and whether Ernst can win back the affection of Erin, his wife, whom he still clearly loves, but she's with Michael. The only reason they even try to solve Mr. Greenboot's murder is to prevent convicted murderer Michael, who's one day out of jail, from being accused and blamed for it. And then he also lied. He was actually out and he could have committed the murder at the time, but his alibi is he was digging up a grave and stealing a grave. It's an awesome alibi. They're at this resort and there's sketchy Wi-Fi and the cell service is not great. So why not, solve this murder and give Ernst a chance to use his crime detecting skills that he claims to be an expert on because he's writing books about how to write books about it. And then so the premise is kind of, what if somebody died? Nobody cared because they were all wrapped up in their own family drama. And so that only works if you have a family that could rival the family of Carmines on the TV show The Bear in the episode called Fishes. And that's the one where the whole extended family was at the mom's house. It was Jamie Lee Curtis was the guest star. She was the matriarch. She was the matriarch on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Actual knives were thrown at this family dinner. And I kind of pictured Audrey as the mom in that episode. And it's like, what's going to happen next with this family? We don't know. We're going to keep reading, even though we don't really care that much about Mr. Green Boots and the other stuff. How does this impact the mystery novel structure? The biggest impact is that the clues that we're looking for are really the clues about their backstory in this family history and not the clues about Mr. Green Boots, right? How many clues that we tracked were about Mr. Green Boots? Very few. Most of them were
Yeah.
about what was going on in the past. How does this impact the pacing? Well, because it's already in first person past, we know that he's going to survive. He's in danger, but it's not really heart-pounding thriller. And we know that he's writing this book and the next series of books. And so I think the pacing is a little bit more, gather around, friends, I'm going to tell you a yarn. And I'm here to listen to that yarn because it was entertaining. But
Yes,
I
it's like a
wasn't like
story.
edge of my seat though. Yeah.
It's like a story you hear around a campfire.
That's right. Yes. Yes. And then there was the time we went on this family trip and all these people died. It's like, oh, tell us again. So, all right, we're getting to it. What should authors not take away from this book? In other words, what techniques work specifically here because of this narrator, this genre, this tone that might fail if you tried to do it in another type of novel? And then just generally, what advice do you have for readers when writing with a comedic tone?
I think, like we've mentioned earlier, breaking the fourth wall really works best if it is comedic, like you said, like the Deadpool effect or whatever. I don't think it would have worked in, a thriller or a drama. Maybe you could get by with it in like a romantic comedy, but
Oh
just a
yeah.
plain romance, I don't think it would have worked.
No, I think
So,
this would work well in rom-com too. Now, I will admit that I encourage newer writers, people who are still learning writing craft, to try and keep it simple and don't break the fourth wall and don't break the spell of fiction by injecting unnecessary comments from the future that take people out of it. If you want to do that, you need to do it consistently and early and make it a feature. And if you're writing something that's more emotionally evocative, I think it would fall pretty flat. I say that, but then I also recently watched the movie finale of The Amazing Digital Circus. That's pretty much about mental health, and it had a ton of humor in it. I can't remember if they were breaking the fourth wall, but it is possible to have some characters who are quite glib, even in the tone of a series that's serious. And that whole kind of tone reminded me of Squid Games. It's like, here we are with these amusing schoolyard games where we murder people. Okay, so as for adding humor, I always think, inject the unexpected. What's
yes.
what's the least likely that could happen? Let's try that. And always add some wordplay and make sure that it's consistent with your character. It needs to be organic to who they are based on their backstory. So I think our main character, Ernst, he's been estranged from his family, which is hurting him, even though he doesn't want to admit that. So he's got this comedic shell to protect himself. He's lost family. He's lost his marriage. He's not in a great place here. He's trying to eke out a living, writing books for $1.99. That's a slog, man. So Ernst is surrounded by loss and family deaths and the loss of his marriage. And so he's really adapted a gallows humor because he would rather face that than some of the grim realities of the other stuff that's going on. But it
Yeah, I
worked
think
for him.
he,
Yeah.
oh, I was going to say, he even mentions at some point in the book, he's like, can you tell I use humor to deflect things?
Yes, I
So,
can.
yeah.
That's what we had. Thank you so much for joining me, Jennifer. This was awesome.
Well, thank you. This was fun. I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah. And so, yeah, let me know if you want to join me for another one. Viewers, if you like this, you can check out my previous novel deep dives of Kill Your Darlings by Peter Swanson, Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, Missing White Woman by Kelly Garrett, The Will of the Many by James Islington, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, 24 Seconds from Now by Jason Reynolds, The Overnight Guest by Heather Gutenkopf, and Culpability by Bruce Holsinger. And there will be more coming in the weeks to come. Tune in next week for another video about writing, editing, and the writing life. This is freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow wishing you happy writing. Be sure to like and subscribe. This is freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow wishing you happy writing.